She had endured 6 years of silence, 6 years of swallowing her pride at that dinner table, while Lucia Valenti picked her apart like something stuck to the bottom of a designer shoe. 6 years of smiling through gritted teeth, while Roman's family whispered behind crystal wine glasses that he had made a terrible mistake. And then one evening, in front of everyone who had ever looked down at her, Lucia pointed a manicured finger toward the front door of that mansion and said the words she had clearly been saving for years. "Get out of my house." Not Roman's house. My house. As if Amara had never belonged there. As if 6 years meant nothing. As if she were a stray that had wandered in off the street and finally overstayed her welcome. What Lucia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Amara Whitfield had been quietly, methodically, legally purchasing the ground they were all standing on. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who thought they knew exactly what you were worth, this story is going to hit somewhere deep. Stay with me. And before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. This channel is where the stories go that make you lean forward in your chair. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button too. It tells me you're ready for what comes next. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Amara had not always been the kind of woman who kept secrets. Growing up in a narrow 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago, she had been the kind of girl who said exactly what she thought, sometimes before she had finished thinking it. Her mother, Diane, a cafeteria worker with swollen ankles and a laugh that could shake the walls, used to tell her that her mouth would either make her fortune or cost her everything. Probably both, in that order. She was not wrong. Amara was brilliant in the way that certain people are brilliant when nobody is watching, quietly, stubbornly, without any applause to keep her going. She studied accounting at a state university on scholarship and financial aid, and 2 part-time jobs. Not graduated with honors nobody outside her mother's kitchen celebrated, and went to work at a mid-sized financial advisory firm, where she spent 3 years watching wealthy men take credit for strategies she had built from the ground up. She did not complain about this for a long time. She watched. She learned exactly how money moved when powerful people believed they were in control of it. And then slowly, she began building something of her own. Blackstone Holdings was not born from a grand vision or a dramatic moment of inspiration. It was born from a spreadsheet Amara built on a second-hand laptop on a Tuesday night, a list of undervalued debt portfolios that larger firms had written off too quickly. She started small. She stayed invisible. She understood early that visibility was a luxury she could not afford, not as a black woman, with no family connections and no inherited wealth, trying to operate in spaces that had not historically welcomed any of those facts about her. She was 28 when she first turned a significant profit. She was 31 when she met Roman Valenti. The meeting was not romantic, at least not at first. Roman came into Amara's professional orbit through a client referral. One of Blackstone's early legitimate partners had mentioned her quietly to a man who was looking for someone to help untangle a complicated property situation on the city's north side. Roman had several legitimate businesses: construction companies, commercial real estate holdings, a string of restaurants and nightclubs that turned real money separate from everything else his family was known for. He needed someone discreet, competent, someone who would not ask questions that weren't their business. He did not expect Amara. She remembered the first time he walked into the temporary office she rented by the hour in a shared workspace downtown. He was bigger than she expected, not in a threatening way, but in the way of a man who had never once in his life been made to feel small. Dark suit, no tie, dark eyes that moved around a room like they were taking inventory. He shook her hand and looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't solved yet. "You're younger than I thought you'd be," he said. "You're more punctual than I expected," she replied. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly. More like the acknowledgement that he was going to have to pay attention. They worked together professionally for 7 months before anything personal developed between them. Amara was careful. She had worked too hard to blur lines carelessly. But Roman was persistent in a way that was different from the men she had known before him. Not pushy, not entitled, just quietly consistent. He brought coffee when he came to meetings. He remembered small things she mentioned once and never repeated. He listened in a way that made her feel like what she said was actually landing somewhere inside him rather than bouncing off. She fell in love slowly, the way careful people do. She also made a decision, somewhere during those early months, that she would not reveal the full extent of what Blackstone was becoming. Not yet, not to him, not to anyone connected to him. She had learned from watching others that money changed relationships in ways that were difficult to predict and nearly impossible to reverse. She loved this man. She wanted to know first whether he loved her, not what she had built, not what she could do for him. It seemed, in those early years, like a reasonable precaution. She could not have imagined then how much that decision would eventually cost her. The Valenti family welcomed Amara the way a body sometimes welcomes a foreign object, with a polite enough surface response, while the deeper system worked steadily to reject her. Roman's mother, Lucia, was 71 years old and had spent the better part of 5 decades constructing herself into the untouchable matriarch of a family that ran on fear and loyalty and the specific kind of pride that refuses to examine itself. She was elegant in the way that requires enormous effort to maintain. She wore that effort like armor, and she had decided within approximately 15 minutes of meeting Amara that this woman was not what the Valenti name required. She never said this directly. People like Lucia rarely did. Instead, it came in smaller cuts. The way she would address Roman's cousins by their full names at dinner and call Amara dear in a tone that meant nothing warm at all. The way she would ask, with perfectly arranged concern, about Amara's family, meaning her mother's apartment, her working-class background. The absence of the kind of pedigree that Lucia had decided was the only evidence of worth. The comments about Amara's clothing that were phrased as compliments, but carried small embedded needles. The way she would begin sentences with Roman's first wife, when Roman had never been married before, as if she were practicing for a future she was already certain of. Roman noticed some of it. He would squeeze Amara's hand under the table at family dinners. He would say, afterward, that his mother was old-fashioned and meant nothing by it. He would tell Amara that she was imagining the worst of it. Amara was not imagining it. But she loved Roman, and she understood that asking a man to see his mother clearly is sometimes asking too much. So she carried it. She absorbed the small humiliations, the way water is absorbed by dry earth, steadily, invisibly, until you can't see where it all went, but you know something has changed. What she did not do during those 6 years was stop watching the Valenti Empire's financial situation with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. Roman's legitimate businesses were struggling in ways he didn't fully understand. Debt that had seemed manageable was compounding. Properties that had been used as collateral for loans were more vulnerable than anyone inside the family realized. Certain creditors were growing impatient in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. Amara saw all of it, and quietly, through Blackstone, she began to do something about it. She did not tell Roman. She told herself it was because the timing wasn't right, that she would explain everything when things stabilized, that protecting him didn't require him to know the source of the protection. And those things were partially true. But the deeper truth, the one she was not entirely ready to examine, was that she was afraid. Afraid that if Roman knew the full extent of her wealth, something between them would shift in a way she couldn't control. Afraid that the love she had built so carefully would suddenly become something else, something transactional, something complicated, something that would make it impossible to know anymore what was real. She carried that fear alongside everything else. The first serious crack appeared not in the marriage itself, but in Roman's behavior, a small pattern of absences that Amara filed away without fully confronting. Late nights that extended past when they normally did. A phone that Roman suddenly kept face down, on countertops in a way he never had before. Conversations that stopped just slightly too quickly when she walked into a room. The way he answered certain calls in a voice that was warmer than the voice he used for business. She did not immediately conclude the worst. She was not the kind of woman who jumped to conclusions. She had trained herself out of that, both personally and professionally, because conclusions drawn too quickly from incomplete information were how people lost money and made mistakes they couldn't take back. But she was also not naive. She hired a private investigator through an attorney who had no connection to Blackstone and no connection to anything tied to the Valenti name. She received the first report on a Wednesday morning, sitting at the kitchen table of the mansion with a cup of coffee she had made herself, because the housekeeper hadn't arrived yet. Selena Voss, 34 years old, financial advisor. She had come into Roman's organization 18 months earlier through a recommendation from one of his captains, presenting herself as a specialist in moving money through legitimate channels in ways that reduced exposure. She was good at what she did. Roman had trusted her quickly. Amara read the report twice. Then she folded it, placed it in the bottom of her briefcase, and went about the rest of her Wednesday as though she had read nothing of consequence at all. What she did, instead of confronting Roman, was begin looking more carefully at Selena Voss. What she found over the following weeks was not just an affair. It was a systematic financial hemorrhage that had been so carefully constructed, so deliberately layered, that even someone looking for it could spend weeks before the full picture became clear. Consulting payments routed through companies that existed only on paper. Casino revenue that had been redirected so slowly and in amounts small enough that no single month's discrepancy would trigger alarm but accumulated over 18 months told a completely different story. Construction contracts that had been awarded at inflated rates to companies with no real workforce, the difference disappearing into accounts that, if you traced them through 6 or 7 layers of corporate structure, eventually arrived somewhere connected to an organization that was not the Valenti family. Amara was meticulous. She did not rush. She documented everything with the precision of someone who had spent her entire career understanding that financial evidence only matters if it is airtight. By the time she was ready to act on what she had found, she knew something else, too. Selena Voss had not come into Roman's world to fall in love with him. She had come with a purpose. And the organization she was quietly feeding information to operational details, financial vulnerabilities, timing of certain transactions, was preparing to dismantle what remained of the Valenti Empire at a moment of maximum weakness. Amara did not bring this to Roman. She brought it to her own attorneys instead, and she continued to quietly stabilize the Valenti businesses through Blackstone, because those businesses employed hundreds of people who had nothing to do with any of this people, who showed up every day and did their work and had families to feed. She was still protecting him. She was protecting the man who was sleeping with the woman destroying him, and she was doing it from behind a wall of financial architecture so carefully constructed that he would never even know to be grateful. This is the part of the story where you have to decide what you think of Amara. She was not perfect. The secrecy that had once felt like reasonable caution had become something more complicated. She had been given opportunities to tell Roman the truth about Blackstone, about all of it, and she had chosen, each time, to wait a little longer. There was love in that choice, yes, but there was also fear, and there was something else she was only beginning to understand. A part of her had liked having something entirely her own, something that no one in the Valenti world could reach or diminish or fold into the question of whose wife she was. That was human. It was also a mistake, because while she was managing everything from a careful distance, Roman was being told a different story about her entirely. The dinner that changed everything was on a Friday, in late October. Amara had known, in the way you sometimes know things before you have the specific information to confirm them, that something was coming. Roman had been distant for nearly a week, in a way that felt different from his usual preoccupations, not distracted, but deliberate, closed off in a specific direction. The dining room at the Valenti mansion held 20 people comfortably. That night it held 17, which was enough. Roman's captains, several family members, Lucia at the head of the table, in the chair she had occupied for 40 years, dressed in black the way she often was, as if she were perpetually prepared for someone's funeral. Selena Voss was there, seated to Roman's left where Amara normally sat. Amara noticed this when she walked in. She did not say anything. She took a seat farther down the table and watched. Roman stood before the first course was served. He was a man who carried authority in the way certain men do, not because he demanded attention, but because the room had learned to organize itself around him. When he stood, conversation stopped. That night was no different, except that his eyes, when they found Amara's across the table, held something she had never seen in them before. Not anger, not guilt. Something that looked almost like a decision already made. He had a folder in his hand. He set it on the table in front of Amara. She looked at it. She looked at him. "We need to end this," he said, quietly, in front of everyone. Lucia's expression at the far end of the table did not change, which meant she had known this was coming, which meant it had been planned. The folder contained divorce papers. Amara did not reach for them immediately. She sat with her hands in her lap and took one slow breath and looked at the man she had spent 6 years of her life loving. The man whose empire she had been silently holding together for years. The man who was now standing across the dinner table with his mistress, seated where his wife used to sit, presenting her with documents that had been drawn up by his family's attorneys. And then Lucia spoke. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Lucia Valenti had spent 71 years understanding that the quietest version of cruelty carries furthest. 6 years, she said, addressing the table more than Amara. 6 years in this family, and she still doesn't belong here. She looked at Amara then, directly, with perfect composure. "It's time for you to go, dear. This is not your home." The room went very still. Amara felt 17 pairs of eyes on her face. She thought about all the dinners she had sat through at this table, all the meals she had eaten in careful silence while Lucia's remarks found their targets. All the times she had squeezed her own hands under the tablecloth to keep from saying the thing sitting at the top of her throat. All the years she had protected this family without any of them knowing she was doing it, without any of them asking, without any of them ever once treating her as though she were something more than a woman who had somehow maneuvered herself into a position she didn't deserve. She reached into the bag beside her chair. She pulled out a black folder thicker than the one Roman had placed in front of her and held together with a metal clip that made a small sound when it caught the light. She set it on the table. "Before anyone signs anything," she said, and her voice was even, "I'd suggest having the family's attorney read this first." Roman's attorney, a thin man named Gerald, who had been with the Valenti family for 20 years, took the folder with the automatic deference of someone who understood that, in this room, you didn't ask questions before you followed instructions. He opened it. The first page took him less than 30 seconds to read. The second page took longer. His hands, Amara noticed, were not entirely steady by the time he reached it. He looked up at Roman, then at Lucia, then at the folder again. "What is it?" Roman's voice had changed. Some of the authority had shifted into something that sounded, for the first time in Amara's memory, uncertain. Gerald cleared his throat. He said the name, Blackstone Holdings. He explained haltingly, in the halting way of a man, recalibrating his understanding of the room he was standing in, that Blackstone Holdings had, over a period of several years, acquired significant positions in the debt and mortgage structures, underpinning several Valenti family properties and business entities, that the terms of those positions were legal, documented, enforceable. "Who owns Blackstone?" Roman asked. Gerald looked at Amara, and Amara, for the first time in 6 years at that table, said something that needed no qualification, no apology, and no careful management of anyone else's reaction. "I do," she said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Amara had ever heard in that dining room. Lucia's composure, that 71-year-old fortress of a composure, developed something in it that might, in another woman's face, have been called a crack. Roman stared at his wife. His wife looked back at him with the calm expression of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for this moment and was now simply allowing it to arrive. Outside, the October wind had picked up. Somewhere in the house, a door had not been properly latched and was tapping quietly against its frame. The marriage was not over yet, but something had ended, and something else, long buried under 6 years of silence and patience and swallowed pride, had just walked into the room and taken a seat at the table where it had always belonged. The attorney closed the folder. Nobody at the table moved. Roman was still standing. That was the thing Amara noticed first, that he hadn't sat down, hadn't stepped back, hadn't done any of the physical things a person does when the ground shifts under them. He was just standing there with both hands flat on the table and his jaw set in a way that she recognized, that she had seen 100 times across boardrooms and family disputes and situations where someone had pushed back against something Roman Valenti had decided. It was the face he made when he refused to accept information that didn't fit the story he was already telling himself. "Say that again," he said, quietly. Gerald did not want to say it again. That was visible in every line of the man's body, the slight forward hunch, the way his fingers pressed the folder closed, as if closing it might change what was inside. Blackstone Holdings holds secured positions on 14 Valenti-connected properties and 3 business debt structures, Gerald said. His voice had the careful flatness of a man delivering a diagnosis. The acquisitions were made over a period of approximately 4 years. All of them are legally documented and recorded with the relevant county and state offices. The positions are enforceable. Roman's eyes moved to Amara. 4 years, he said. A little more than that, she said. Something passed across his face. It was not grief. It was not even anger. Not yet. It was something more specific than either the particular expression of a man who has just realized that a conversation he thought he was controlling had actually been controlled by someone else the entire time. A man who does not know yet whether to feel betrayed or humiliated, and is arriving, in real time, at the conclusion that he feels both. You've been building a financial position against my family, he said, while sleeping in my house, while saving your family, Amara said. There's a difference, that's not. The Meridian Street properties were 3 weeks from foreclosure in February of 2021. She said it without heat, like she was reading from a report. The creditor had already engaged a collections attorney. I purchased the debt. The foreclosure stopped. You never knew it was happening because I made sure you wouldn't need to. The room was so quiet that the tapping of that unlatched door somewhere in the house had become the loudest sound in it. Roman's captain, a heavy-set man named Dom, who had been with the Valenti family for over 20 years and who was not known for speaking during family discussions unless invited, shifted his weight in his chair. It was a small movement, but Amara caught it. The others were watching Roman. Lucia was watching Amara. You lied to me. Roman's voice had dropped to something that was almost conversational, which was worse than shouting. 6 years of lying to my face. I kept a secret, Amara said. Those aren't the same thing. In my world, they are. Then your world has a very convenient definition. Selena, who had been silent since the folder appeared on the table, made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, something in between. It was a mistake. Amara's eyes moved to her, and whatever Selena saw in that look made the sound stop. Roman noticed the exchange. He looked at Selena, then at Amara, and his face closed down the way it did when he was organizing himself around a decision. Everyone out, he said. Nobody needed to be told twice. The scraping of chairs was immediate and unanimous. Gerald gathered his folders. The captains filed toward the door with the practiced quiet of men who understood that some rooms needed to empty fast. Family members followed. Even the servers who had been standing along the far wall vanished through the kitchen door with the particular skill of people who have spent years learning to disappear on command. Lucia did not move. Roman looked at her. Mama. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough to establish that she was leaving because she chose to, not because she was told. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked out without looking at Amara at all, which was, in its way, its own kind of statement. Selena was the last to stand. She put her hand briefly on Roman's arm, a proprietary gesture, deliberate, meant to be seen. Then she walked out. The door closed. Amara and Roman were alone in the dining room for the first time in what felt like months. Maybe it had been months. She couldn't remember. The last time they had been in a room together without the managed distance they had both, separately, constructed. How long have you known? Roman said. About what specifically? Don't. His voice cracked at the edge of that word. Don't do the thing where you answer questions with questions. How long have you known about Selena? Amara folded her hands on the table. 14 months, she said. He looked like she had struck him. Not because of the number itself, but because of what it meant that she had known for 14 months and said nothing. Had continued living in this house, sleeping in their bed, eating at this table, and said nothing. You knew for 14 months, and I was building a case, she said. I wasn't ready. A case. He repeated it like the word had a bad taste. You were building a case against my financials advisor. Against the woman who has been stealing from you for 2 years, Amara said. Yes. The silence that followed was different from the one before. Harder. More complicated. Roman pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. He put both hands on the table. He looked at them for a moment, at his own hands, in the way people sometimes do when they need to look at something that is not another person's face. What did you find, he said. Enough, she said. Amara, consulting fees paid to companies that don't have employees. 3 of them share a registered agent address in Delaware. The casino revenue discrepancies go back 22 months. The amounts were small enough that they wouldn't trigger anything internal, but cumulatively we're talking about a significant number. She paused. There's more. I'm not going to give you all of it in this room tonight. He looked up at her. Why not? Because you just handed me divorce papers in front of your entire organization, she said. And I want to make sure that what I give you, you actually hear. Roman was quiet for a moment. His face was doing something complicated. She told me you were moving against us, he said. Salinas. She said she'd been tracking unusual activity in the debt market's positions being accumulated. She said it looked like a coordinated play, someone trying to get leverage over the family. He stopped. She told me to look at people close to me. Amara heard those words and understood exactly what they meant and exactly how they had been constructed to mean it. She was describing herself, Amara said flatly. I know that now. Do you? He met her eyes. Yes. She studied him for a long moment. The Roman she had married had been many things hard and sometimes unreachable and entirely too proud, but he had not been dishonest with her. Not until recently, she had always been able to look at his face and find something real in it. She wasn't sure she could find it now. I need to think, she said. She stood, and you need to talk to your attorney. Not Gerald, someone Selena has never met. She picked up the black folder from the table. She did not take the divorce papers. She left them where Roman had placed them. The next 72 hours inside the Valenti mansion were the kind that left marks. Lucia came to Amara's sitting room the following morning. She did not knock. She opened the door and walked in the way she had always moved through that house, as if the concept of a space belonging to someone else was a fiction she had agreed to tolerate, but never fully accepted. Amara was at the small writing desk near the window. She had a coffee that had gone lukewarm and 3 legal documents open in front of her. She did not stand. Lucia closed the door behind her. I want to understand what you want, Lucia said. She took the chair across the desk without being offered it. From all of this. I want what I've always wanted, Amara said. For Roman's legitimate businesses to survive. For the people who work for him to keep their jobs. For the person who has been systematically destroying his operation from the inside to be stopped. That's very generous, Lucia said. For a woman who has just been handed divorce papers. I've always been generous, Amara said. That was apparently mistaken for weakness. Lucia was quiet for a beat. The look she gave Amara was different from the one she had given across dinner tables for 6 years. It was more careful, as if she were looking at something she had previously categorized, and was now, reluctantly, recategorizing. Roman built this family, Lucia said. His father built it before him. The decisions that hold this organization together are not made by women who keep secrets. The decisions that nearly destroyed this organization, Amara said carefully, were made by men who didn't know they were being robbed. I kept it alive. You bought our debts. To protect them. You positioned yourself to own us. Amara set down her pen. I positioned myself to protect my husband's business from collapsing, while he was too distracted to see what was being done to him. If I had wanted to own you, Mrs. Valenti, I would have let the Meridian Street foreclosure proceed. I would have let the casino accounts drain out. I would have watched this family's legitimate holdings get picked apart by a rival organization and bought the pieces at a discount. She held Lucia's gaze without flinching. I didn't. Ask your attorney why I didn't. Lucia stood. Something in her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight adjustment, like a building's settling after pressure. She walked to the door. What you have done, she said without turning around, does not make you family. No, Amara agreed. Nothing I could have done would have made me family. We established that a long time ago. Lucia left. Amara picked up her pen and went back to the documents. Her hand was not entirely steady. She pressed it flat against the desk for a moment until it was. By the 3rd day, the house had organized itself into something that felt like a Cold War conducted through closed doors and careful timing. Amara moved through it with the focused detachment of someone who has decided that feeling things fully can wait. There was too much work. Blackstone's investigators had continued compiling during the dinner, and the days after it she had teams she trusted, people who understood discretion, the way surgeon understands sterile fields. and they had continued pulling on threads that Selena Voss had been counting on staying hidden. What kept emerging was worse than Amara had initially understood. The rival organization she had been careful not to put a name to it, yet in any of her documentation, had been receiving specific operational information, not just financial data, details about timing, about personnel, about which of Roman's captains were reliable and which had vulnerabilities that could be exploited. This was not the work of someone skimming money from casino accounts. This was intelligence gathering, systematic and deliberate, and running on a timeline that Amara's investigators believed was approaching some kind of threshold. Someone was preparing to move, and they were planning to move soon. She was sitting with this information on the third evening when Roman came to her sitting room. He did knock. She noticed that. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, not the normal exhaustion of a man carrying the weight of what he ran, but something more hollowed out. Like he had spent 3 days having an argument with himself and was not entirely sure which version of himself had won. He sat without being asked. "I talked to the new attorney," he said, "and I talked to Dom. I had him run an independent pull on the casino accounts." "What did Dom find?" "Enough to start asking questions I should have asked 8 months ago." He didn't see the side of his face. "How did you know where to look?" "I've been watching your financial structure for years," she said. "I knew what the numbers were supposed to look like. When they started not looking like that, I noticed. Why didn't you tell me?" The question landed with all its weight. Amara was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't have an answer, but because there were several answers and she was deciding which one was the honest one, and not just the comfortable one. "Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me over her," she said. "And I was right. You didn't." He didn't try to argue that. "What else do you have?" he said. "Roam all of it, Amara. I need all of it." She looked at him. The man she had married was in there, somewhere behind the exhaustion and the pride and the 3 days of whatever reckoning he had put himself through. She could see him. "The communications with the outside organization are what concerns me most," she said. "My investigators believe they have a timeline. I don't know yet what that timeline looks like, but I know it's not far out." Roman went still. "How long have you known this?" "I suspected it for about 6 weeks. I had confirmation 4 days ago." 4 days, he stopped himself. She could see him managing the anger, pressing it down to a place where it wouldn't get in the way of thinking clearly. "Who?" "I don't have a name yet. I have financial trails. The name will come." He stood. He paced to the window and stood there with his back to her. "I need the full file," he said. "I know," she said, "and I'll give it to you. But I want something first." He turned around. "I want the divorce papers off the table," she said. "Not because I'm asking to save the marriage right now. I don't know if the marriage can be saved. But I'm not going to help you save your organization while your attorneys are simultaneously preparing to dismantle our financial arrangement in a way that benefits you and not me." She held his gaze. "I want 90 days. No legal proceedings, no filings. 90 days where we work on this together, and then we can decide what's left when it's done." He was quiet for a long time. 90 days, he said. "That's what I'm asking." He nodded once. She nodded back. It was not reconciliation. It was a treaty between two people who had hurt each other and who still, underneath all of it, had not yet managed to stop caring what happened to the other one, which is sometimes worse than simply being enemies. Selena Voss was not a woman who panicked easily. She had spent her professional life in rooms where information was currency and composure was the only thing standing between a person and catastrophic exposure. She had sat across from difficult men in difficult situations, and she had kept her voice level and her reasoning clear, and she had found the path through. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. But she had not anticipated Amara. She had anticipated the wife as a variable, certainly. Every plan accounts for variables. But the wife she had been told about, the working-class woman Roman, had inexplicably married, the outsider who had never been accepted by the family, the woman who endured the dinners and the small cruelties, and apparently just kept enduring them. That wife had not seemed like a threat. That wife had seemed like someone who would eventually be handled. She had dramatically miscalculated. She understood this now. Sitting in the apartment, she kept separate from everything connected to the Valenti organization. Her laptop open to documents. She was reassessing with new eyes. The black folder. Whatever was inside it. Amara had prepared something, had been preparing it for some time, and Selena did not yet know the full extent of what it contained. She needed to know. She also needed Roman. Specifically, she needed Roman to remain uncertain about Amara, uncertain enough to keep some distance between them, enough that whatever Amara was building could be characterized as self-interested to manipulation rather than protection. She had planted that seed already. The question was whether it would hold now that the folder had appeared. She picked up her phone. She made 2 calls. The first was short. The second was longer, conducted in a low voice, with careful language that would mean nothing to anyone who overheard it and everything to the person on the other end. When she was done, she sat for a while in the quiet of the apartment. She thought about the look on Amara's face across the dinner table when Gerald's hands had started shaking. That particular quality of stillness. Not the stillness of someone trying to control their emotions. The stillness of someone who already knew exactly how this scene would play out because they had written it. Selena had been in this business long enough to know that the most dangerous person in any room was never the one making the most noise. She began to build her counter. What Amara did not know, what she could not have known, because the information was buried under enough protective layers, that even Blackstone's forensic team had not yet reached it, was that Selena's arrangement with the outside organization included a provision she had not initially considered significant. She had agreed, early in her work for the Valentis, to certain documentation requirements. A record kept. Insurance, she called it in her own private thinking. Evidence that could be deployed if Roman ever decided she was more useful as a sacrifice than a partner. Those recordings, conversations with Roman, private and unguarded, in the way conversations between people who believe they are trusted tend to be, had been preserved on a remote server. Selena controlled independently of everything else. She had never intended to use them to hurt Roman. She had intended them to protect herself. But the thing about insurance is that it exists for moments when everything else has failed. And for the first time in 2 years of careful, methodical work inside the Valenti organization, Selena Voss was looking at the real possibility that everything else was about to fail. On a Tuesday morning, Roman summoned his captains to the private room at the back of the Valenti family's casino on the north side. He told them there was a problem inside the organization. He did not tell them yet what kind or how deep. He asked Dom to begin conducting informal conversations, careful, quiet, unthreatening with anyone who had had direct financial contact with Selena Voss over the past 20 months. Dom started that afternoon. Selena heard about the conversations by 8 o'clock that evening through a contact she had maintained precisely for situations like this. She showed up at the mansion at 9. Roman's staff let her in because she had always been let in. Because until 72 hours ago, she had been the woman Roman trusted most inside his professional world, and the staff had not yet received instructions that said otherwise. Amara was at the top of the stairs when she heard Selena's voice in the entryway below. She stood at the railing and looked down. Selena looked up. The 2 women regarded each other across the height of the staircase, for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then Selena looked away first. She turned toward Roman's study, where the light was on under the door. Amara went back to her sitting room. She sat at the writing desk. She opened a drawer and took out a single sheet of paper on which she had written, in her own hand, a series of account numbers and transfer dates. She had written it 3 weeks ago. She had been deciding what to do with it ever since. She folded it carefully. She placed it in an envelope. She sealed it. Then she picked up her phone and sent a single text message to an attorney whose name appeared nowhere in any Valenti document, a woman named Sandra Park who operated out of a small office in the West Loop and who had been working quietly on Amara's instructions for the past several months. The text said, "Move to the next stage." Sandra texted back 2 minutes later, "Understood." Amara set the phone, face down on the desk. From somewhere below through the floor, she could hear the muffled shape of raised voices, Roman's and Selena's, though she couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of them. The escalation and the pullback and the escalation again. She had made her decision. She was no longer waiting for Roman to choose between them. She was no longer managing the situation. From the careful distance she had maintained for 6 years, whatever was coming, whatever Cecina was building as a counter, whatever the outside organization was planning, whatever remained of the marriage, after everything that had been said and shown in that dining room, it was all converging now. And there was only one way through it. She was going to expose every thread, all of it, Every account, every transfer, every falsified contract, every communication with the people who wanted to destroy what Roman had built. She was going to lay it out with the cold precision she had applied to everything in her professional life. And she was going to do it in a room full of the people who had spent 6 years deciding she didn't belong there. She was going to make it impossible for anyone to look away. Downstairs, the voices had stopped. A door opened, closed. Then, footsteps on the stairs, a single set, moving quickly, and Amara knew by the weight and rhythm of them that it was not Roman. The footsteps paused outside her sitting room door. A long pause. Then they moved away. Amara kept her hand flat on the sealed envelope. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous and full of its own noise. She had grown up inside that noise. She had built an empire inside it without anyone watching. She had loved a man inside it and held her tongue and swallowed her worth and waited the way certain women wait for a moment that justified everything. The moment had arrived. The only question left was whether what came next would cost her more than she was prepared to pay. She already knew the answer. She had known it for a long time. She picked up the envelope, stood, and walked to her closet. Behind a panel in the back wall, a modification she had made quietly 2 years earlier during a renovation, paid for through a contractor, with no connection to any Valenti account, was a small fireproof safe. She placed the envelope inside. She closed the safe. She pressed her forehead, briefly, against the cool surface of the closet wall. Then she straightened, walked back to her desk, opened the document on her laptop that she had been working on for 4 months, and began to type the final section. There was no longer any version of this story in which Amara Whitfield stayed silent. The document on Amara's laptop had 47 pages by the time she finished typing that night. She did not read it back. She had been living inside it for 4 months, and she knew every line of it the way you know the layout of a house you grew up in, not because you memorized it deliberately, but because your body had moved through it so many times that the knowledge lived somewhere below conscious thought. She saved it to 3 separate encrypted drives and emailed a compressed version to Sandra Park with a password that Sandra already had, established weeks ago for exactly this contingency. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the quiet. It was past 2 in the morning. The house had been still for hours. Roman's light, visible from her window as a thin yellow line under the study door on the far side of the courtyard, had gone out sometime around midnight. She didn't know if Selena was still in the building. She hadn't heard the front door, but that meant nothing in a house this size. She went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept. That surprised her a little, the capacity to sleep in the middle of something like this. But exhaustion is not selective. It does not wait for appropriate moments. She was up before 6. She was dressed and at her writing desk with fresh coffee when her phone rang at 6:43. It was Sandra. "We have a problem," Sandra said. Those 4 words in Sandra Park's voice were notable because Sandra was not a woman who used them casually. In 3 years of working together, Amara had heard Sandra use that specific phrase exactly twice. Both times it had been accurate. "Tell me," Amara said. "Someone accessed the Blackstone filing records through the county assessor's portal last night. Not a standard access, the query was structured to pull everything connected to a specific set of registration numbers. Our registration numbers." Amara set down her coffee. "When?" "Between 11:15 and 11:40 p.m. "Who ran the query?" "The access was through a registered legal account. The firm name on the account is Harwick & Associates." Amara didn't recognize it immediately. Then she did, and the recognition moved through her like cold water. Harwick & Associates was a small firm that operated primarily as a registered agent service for corporate structures. She knew it not because she had ever used it, but because it had appeared twice in the financial documents her investigators had traced back through Selena's network of shell companies. "She knows what we have," Amara said. "She knew enough to look for it," Sandra said. "Whether she knows the full extent, she knows is enough." Amara stood. She moved to the window. The courtyard below was empty, the stone wet from overnight rain. "How much of our structure is visible through those filings?" Sandra was quiet for a half second. "The positions themselves, the property addresses, the recording dates, not the internal mechanics, not the forensic work. So she knows what Blackstone holds. She doesn't know what else we've built." "Correct." "Okay. Amara pressed 2 fingers against her temple. Okay, move the timeline up. I need everything ready for a room presentation within 72 hours. Can you do that? I can do that, Sandra said. Amara, be careful today. Amara said she would. She hung up. She stood at the window for another 30 seconds, watching the wet courtyard, the empty fountain at its center that Lucia had never allowed to be turned off except in the deepest winter. Then she went to find Roman. He was in the kitchen, which surprised her. In 6 years, she had rarely seen him in the kitchen before 8. He was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee he clearly hadn't touched, staring at the surface of the island in the unfocused way of a man whose thoughts were too loud for the room to contain. He looked up when she came in. She could see immediately that he hadn't slept either. There were specific ways that Roman's face registered sleeplessness, a tightness around the eyes, a quality of effort in the set of his jaw that wasn't there when he was rested. Someone ran a query on Blackstone's county filings last night, she said, without preamble, through a legal account connected to one of Selena's shell company structures. He put the coffee cup down. She's building a counter, Amara said. Whatever I've assembled, she's going to try to reframe it. Make it look like I orchestrated the financial vulnerabilities so I could position Blackstone to seize the assets. Roman's jaw worked. Could she make that case, he said. The question was asked carefully, not with accusation exactly, but with the specific carefulness of a man who was still, even now, not entirely certain of the answer. Amara looked at him directly. She could construct documents that appear to support it, Amara said. She's already good at constructing documents. That's how she built 2 years of theft that your own people didn't catch. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked. She held his gaze. No, Roman. I cannot make that case honestly. Because the honest case is the opposite. Every Blackstone position in your business structure was taken to protect it, not to strip it. The records show the timing I moved after the vulnerabilities appeared, not before. I didn't create the problems. I responded to them. He was quiet. You believe her, Amara said, not as an accusation, as a statement of fact, flat and precise. Some part of you is still looking at me and wondering. I don't know what I believe right now, he said. I know, she said. That's the point. That's what she needs. She left the kitchen. By noon, she had spoken to Dom. This required some navigation. Dom Ferraro had been Roman's most trusted captain for over 2 decades, and his loyalty was not a thing you assumed extended beyond Roman. But Amara had observed Dom carefully over 6 years, the way she observed everything carefully, and she had come to understand that what drove Dom was not personal loyalty to Roman Valenti, so much as loyalty to the organization itself, to its continuity, to the people inside it who depended on it. That was a distinction that mattered. She found him in the casino's back office, where Roman had set up the informal operational base for the past several days. He looked at her the way men in his position often looked at her, not hostilely, but with the specific assessment of someone calibrating risk. She laid out what Sandra had told her that morning. She told him about the Harwick query. She told him what she believed Selena was preparing. Dom listened without interrupting. He had the quality of a man who had learned a long time ago that listening was almost always more useful than talking. When she finished, he said, "Why are you telling me this instead of Roman?" "Because I already told Roman, and Roman is dealing with something I can't help him with right now." She looked at Dom steadily. "And because I need someone inside this organization who is looking at this clearly. Roman is too close to it." Dom's expression shifted slightly. "You're asking me to run parallel," he said. "I'm asking you to use your own judgment," she said, "which I'm told is considerable." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face, a reassessment, the kind that happens when a person you have categorized one way begins to show you they belong in a different category entirely. "What do you need?" he said. She told him. The next 36 hours moved with the particular compressed intensity of a situation that has passed the point of being managed and entered the phase of simply being survived. Amara's investigators worked through the night. Sandra coordinated from her office, sleeping in 2-hour intervals on the couch in her conference room. Dom quietly pulled 3 men he personally trusted and began walking back through 22 months of casino financial records with a granularity that the previous reviews had not attempted. Roman moved through the mansion like a man conducting an interior trial present in body. elsewhere in mind, occasionally stopping Amara in a hallway to ask a question that was really several questions compressed into one, and then going quiet again when her answers didn't resolve the thing inside him that her answers couldn't resolve. On the second morning, Selena called Roman. Amara was in the adjacent sitting room with the connecting door open 2 inches, not deliberately listening. She told herself, though the distinction felt thin. She heard Roman's side of the conversation. The initial wariness in his voice, the pause while Selena spoke, and then something that shifted, the wariness, into something harder. He came into the sitting room after he hung up. She says she has documentation, he said, showing that Blackstone's positions in my properties were purchased through a coordinated strategy, that the sequence of acquisitions maps to an external playbook, someone identifying weakness and moving in to exploit it. Amara went very still. She sent it to Gerald, Roman said. Don't let Gerald review it without me present, Amara said. Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it was moving fast. Whatever she sent it will look credible. She builds things that look credible. That's her entire skill set. She sent it to Gerald already, Roman said. An hour ago. Amara stood. Call him. Right now. Tell him not to act on anything in those documents until we've had our own forensic team analyze them. Amara, Roman. Her voice cut through cleanly. If she sent documents to your family attorney showing that I positioned Blackstone against you, those documents were created. They did not exist 6 days ago. I know this because I have the actual records of every transaction, every date, every decision, preserved and time-stamped by an independent forensic service. I engaged 8 months before any of this happened in that dining room. She held his gaze. Call Gerald now. He called Gerald. Gerald had already begun reviewing the materials. What Gerald told Roman, in the careful language of a man, navigating something he didn't fully understand, was that the documents appeared comprehensive, that they showed a pattern, that the timestamps and filing references were consistent with county records. Amara could hear this through the phone in Roman's hand because Roman had it on speaker without thinking, or perhaps because he wanted her to hear it. When he hung up, he didn't look at her immediately. She altered the county records, Amara said. The understanding was arriving in real time, and the cold precision of it was almost something she could admire for a second before the implications fully landed. She knew we would use county filings as primary verification. She altered the filing metadata, not the filings themselves that would be too visible. The metadata, the access logs. Roman finally looked at her. Can you prove that, he said. Give me 24 hours. Amara, if Gerald takes those documents to 24 hours. She was already moving toward the door. Keep Gerald away from any decisions for 24 hours. That's all I need. She left the room at something very close to a run, which she managed to convert into a fast walk before she reached the hallway, because this house had eyes in it, and she was not going to let whatever was watching her see anything that looked like panic. Sandra Park's voice on the phone, 20 minutes later, had a quality Amara had never heard in it before. It was contained. Extremely contained in the specific way of someone who has just received information that is bad enough to require a moment of internal management before they can deliver it. Talk to me, Amara said. She was in her car. She had driven away from the mansion because she needed to have this conversation somewhere that was not inside those walls. The forensic timestamping service we used, Sandra said. The third-party company. The one we engaged to create independent verified records of the Blackstone transactions. Delta Veris, Amara said. Delta Veris was a highly regarded digital verification firm. She had researched them for 3 months before engaging them. Their certification was internationally recognized. Delta Veris was acquired 4 months ago, Sandra said. The parent company that bought them, it's private, registered in Luxembourg. The beneficial ownership structure has 6 layers. She paused. We're still tracing it. But the preliminary read from our corporate investigator is that the ultimate beneficial owner connects to the same network as 2 of Selena's Delaware shell companies. The inside of Amara's car went completely quiet. She was parked on a side street she didn't even remember turning onto. The engine was running. Outside, someone was walking a dog past her window, completely indifferent to everything. She got to the verification company, Amara said. She may have bought the verification company, Sandra said, or someone connected to her network did. 4 months ago. 4 months ago. 2 months before the dinner. 2 months before Roman presented divorce papers. 2 months before any of this became visible, which meant it had been planned, not improvised in response to what Amara was building. Planned in advance, anticipating that if Amara had documentation, the documentation would need to be validated by a third party, and that third party needed to be compromised before the moment arrived. Selena Voss had been 3 steps ahead of Amara, in a game Amara had thought she was running. The timestamps, Amara said. Her voice sounded strange to her, thin. If Delta Veris was compromised, our certified timestamps could be challenged. Anyone with access to their systems could have altered our records to match whatever Selena fabricated. Yes, Sandra said. So the documentation I've spent 4 months building looks identical to what she just sent Gerald. From a verification standpoint, identical. Amara pressed her hand flat against the steering wheel. She sat with this for a moment. Then she said, "Who knows about this at Blackstone?" "Just me. I just found out 20 minutes ago." "Keep it that way for now." She thought fast, the way she had always been able to think fast under pressure, the way her mind became weirdly quiet and efficient when everything around it was loud. Sandra, she controls Delta Veris's records, but she doesn't control the original source data, the actual bank records, the county filing originals, the wire transfer confirmations from the financial institutions themselves. Those would require subpoenas to access officially, or an attorney with standing and a cooperative financial institution. Amara's mind was moving now, following the thread. The transfers themselves were real. The money moved through accounts that exist. If we can get direct confirmation from the originating institutions, not through Delta Veris, directly from the banks, we bypass the compromised verification entirely. That takes time, Amara. How much time? 3 days minimum. Probably 5. I have 24 hours. The silence on the line had weight. "I'll make some calls," Sandra said. "I can't promise 5 days becomes 24 hours. "I know," Amara said. "Make the calls anyway." She hung up. She sat in the parked car on the side street she didn't know the name of, and she let herself feel for exactly 90 seconds the full weight of what had just happened. The 4 months of meticulous construction, the care she had taken, the certainty she had felt, sitting at that laptop at 2 in the morning, that she had built something airtight. It wasn't airtight. It had a hole in it so large and so deliberately placed that she had walked right through it without knowing. 90 seconds. Then she put the car in drive. She went to see Dom. Not to the casino this time. She called him, and he gave her a location, a diner, 3 miles from the mansion, where the booths had high backs and the lunch crowd was loud enough to make conversation private. Dom was already there when she arrived. He had coffee. He hadn't touched it. She sat across from him, and she told him everything. Delta Veris. The acquisition, the metadata, the timestamps. The 24-hour window before Gerald could take Selena's fabricated documentation to whoever inside the Valenti organization would use it to declare Amara an enemy of the family rather than a wife in a bad marriage. Dom listened the same way he always listened, without moving much, without his expression shifting dramatically. The quality of a man who has heard difficult things many times and has learned that his reaction to them is a resource, not to be spent carelessly. When she finished, he picked up his coffee cup, set it down without drinking. "What do you need?" he said. "I need access to the physical casino revenue records," she said. "Not the digital records, the physical backup ledgers. The ones kept in the vault on the lower level." Dom looked at her. "Those ledgers are not accessible to—" "I know they're not accessible to me," she said. "I know exactly what I'm asking, and what it would mean if Roman found out I had access to them without his authorization." She held Dom's gaze. "I'm asking anyway." Dom was quiet for a long time. "The ledgers go back how far?" "I need 22 months. He turned the coffee cup in a slow circle on the table. "If those ledgers show what you think they show," he said, "and if I helped you get to them without Roman's knowledge—" "I know," she said. "That's not a small thing." "I know, Dom." He looked at her. For a long moment, he looked at her the way you look at a person when trying to understand something about them that goes beyond what they're saying, what they're made of. Underneath the words, underneath the plan. "You built that company," he said. "It wasn't a question. Blackstone. You built it from nothing." "Yes. And for 4 years you used it to quietly hold this family together." "Yes." Without asking for anything, she started to say that's not entirely accurate, and then she stopped herself, Because Dom was not asking for a complete accounting. He was asking something else. Without asking for recognition, she said instead, "Yes." Dom pushed back his chair. "Give me 2 hours," he said. The physical ledgers were large, cloth-bound books that smelled of a specific combination of ink and enclosed space, and they had been maintained by a man named Eddie Caruso, who had been keeping casino records for the Valenti organization for 16 years, and who had, Dom explained quietly, his own reasons for wanting the truth of the last 22 months examined carefully. Eddie Caruso met them in the lower-level vault room without being told why Amara was there. He placed the ledgers on the table. He opened them to the relevant months, and then he stepped back and stood against the wall and watched Amara work. She worked fast. Her hands moved through pages with the efficiency of someone who had spent years building fluency in financial records. She cross-referenced as she went, using the notes she had on her phone, the digital discrepancies her team had documented, the account numbers, the dates. On the third ledger, 40 minutes in, she found it, not the discrepancy itself. She had known about the discrepancies for months. What she found was something else, a small correction notation in the margin of a page dated 14 months ago, a tiny penciled note in Eddie's handwriting, a flagged variance that had been noted, then somehow never escalated. She looked up at Eddie. "You saw this," she said. Eddie looked at the floor. "Someone told you not to escalate it," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either, Eddie. Her voice was quiet. "I need to know who told you." He shifted against the wall. "I've got a daughter," he said. "She's 16. "I understand," Amara said. "You don't," he said. It wasn't hostile. It was just tired. The tiredness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for 14 months and has run out of positions in which to carry it comfortably. "Someone inside this organization told you to leave it alone," she said, "and you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't." He looked at the ledger on the table, at the small penciled notation in his own handwriting. She said it was being handled at a higher level, he said quietly. "She said if I brought it up through the normal channels, I'd be interfering with something I didn't have clearance to understand." Amara said. Eddie said nothing. He didn't need to. Amara looked at the page in front of her. The notation. The date. 14 months ago, the same approximate window when Selena's manipulation of the casino accounts had begun in earnest. Selena had not just been stealing. She had been systematically identifying anyone inside the organization who might notice, and she had been managing them, individually, personally, using fear where necessary and leverage where possible. She had been running a parallel operation inside Roman's own structure for nearly 2 years, and she had been doing it with the confidence of someone who understood that the most effective place to hide is in plain sight, surrounded by people who have been given reasons not to look too carefully. "Thank you, Eddie," Amara said. She took photographs of the relevant pages with her phone. She documented the penciled notation. She photographed the surrounding context to establish the ledger's authenticity without removing anything physical from the vault. Then she and Dom walked out. In the corridor outside the vault room, Dom stopped walking. Amara stopped too. "Roman needs to see this tonight," Dom said. "Before Gerald does anything with what Selena sent." "I know. And he's going to ask how you got access to those ledgers." "I know that too." Dom looked at her. His face had the expression of a man who has spent 2 decades navigating situations where the right choice and the safe choice were not the same thing, and has learned to live in that gap. "He's not going to like it," Dom said. "No," Amara agreed. "He's not." She walked back toward the elevator. She was almost there when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer it. Some instinct made her stop walking and look at the number again, at the specific sequence of digits, and something in the back of her mind matched it to something she had seen not in her contacts, not anywhere recent, but in the documentation on her laptop, in the pages she had spent 4 months assembling. She answered it. There was a pause on the line. Then a man's voice, low, neutral, the studied neutrality of someone who had trained themselves to sound like nothing in particular. "Mrs. Valenti," he said, "we should talk. Not because I want to cause you problems, because I think you're about to cause yourself one that you don't see coming." Amara's hand tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" she said. "Someone who has been watching this situation longer than you realize," he said. and someone who knows something about your husband that you need to know before tonight. The elevator arrived, its doors opened. Dom stepped in and turned to look at her. She held up one finger. "What do you know?" she said into the phone. The man on the other end paused again, just long enough for the pause itself to function as its own kind of warning. "Your husband knew about Blackstone before the dinner," he said. "Not everything, but enough. He suspected the company was yours for almost 3 years. He didn't ask because he was to see what you would do with it." The elevator doors closed. Dom was gone. Amara stood alone in the corridor and heard those words arrange themselves inside her understanding, like the specific sound of something she had built over a long time, shifting on its foundation. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He saw your name connected to a transaction. "In 2022, the man said. "A property acquisition that crossed his desk during a due diligence review. His attorney flagged it. Roman told him to drop it and not mention it again." Amara's back was against the corridor wall now. She didn't remember putting it there. "He watched you," the man said. "For 3 years he watched and waited. When the money never came out, when you never used Blackstone against him, he started to doubt himself. But the suspicion didn't go away." "Selena," Amara said. The word came out barely above a whisper. "She found out about the 2022 incident," he said. "She used it. She told Roman that if you had hidden this from him, it meant you were planning something. That the only reason to protect his businesses secretly was to own them when the moment was right." Another pause. He didn't fully believe her, but he believed her enough. Amara closed her eyes. Enough. Roman had believed Selena enough. The divorce papers, the dinner, the public humiliation in front of his captains and his family. It hadn't been purely Selena's influence, hadn't been purely Roman's guilt about the affair seeking a justification. It had been the compounded weight of 3 years of private suspicion that Selena had found and pressed on like a bruise, precisely, knowing exactly how much pressure it would take. And Amara had never known any of it. She had spent 3 years believing Roman had no idea, that the secrecy was entirely hers, that she was protecting him from a distance he couldn't see. The entire foundation of her understanding of her own marriage had just been told to her differently. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because Selena doesn't know I'm telling you," he said. "And because what she's planning for tonight isn't just a counter to your documentation." Amara opened her eyes. "She's going to walk into that meeting with Roman's captains," the man said, "and she's going to present the fabricated records and the compromised Delta Veris timestamps, and she's going to add something else." He stopped. "She has recordings, Mrs. Valenti. Private conversations between her and your husband. And she intends to play them in a room full of his captains to establish that Roman himself expressed doubts about your loyalty." The corridor was very quiet. "If she plays those recordings," Amara said slowly, "and Roman's own voice is on them, saying he suspected me, then it doesn't matter what your documents say." The man finished. "Because the man you're trying to defend has already convicted you in his own words." Amara stood in that corridor for a long moment after the call ended. The phone was at her side. The corridor was empty. Somewhere above her, inside the enormous machine of the Valenti organization, tonight was already being assembled the room, the captains, the documents, the recordings, everything Selena had spent 2 years building toward this single moment of maximum damage. And the worst part, the part that moved through Amara's chest like something cold and structural, was not that Selena had outmaneuvered her. It was that Roman had known. For 3 years he had known, or suspected, or known enough, and he had never asked her, never said the name, never walked across the space between them, and said, "I think I know what you are, and I need you to tell me if I'm right." He had watched, and waited, and let Selena turn that waiting into a weapon. Amara pressed her shoulders back against the wall and looked at the ceiling of the corridor. She thought about the woman she had been 6 years ago. The woman who had decided that love required hiding what she had built, that the only way to know if someone loved her was to keep the fullest version of herself out of reach. She thought about how reasonable that had seemed, how protective. It had not protected anything. It had handed Selena Voss a loaded weapon and left it on the table between them. She had one option left, not the option she had planned, not the careful, documented, airtight presentation she had spent 4 months constructing. That was compromised now, or close enough to compromised, that she couldn't use it the way she intended. What she had left was simpler and more dangerous. She had the truth, the raw, unsupported, personal truth, not certified by anyone, not validated through any third party, just the actual sequence of events as she had lived them, in a room full of people who had every reason not to believe her. And she had one name, one source, one person who had been watching long enough to know what was real. The man on the phone. She didn't know who he was yet. She had 30 minutes to find out before Selena walked into that room. She pushed off the wall and moved toward the stairs, and the quality of her movement had changed, not the speed, not the controlled of someone managing a situation, but something rawer than that. Something that had burned through the management and arrived at the place underneath it, where a person finds out what they are actually made of when every careful plan has been stripped away and all that remains is the choice of whether to walk into the fire or not. She had 28 minutes. That was what her phone said when she checked it at the bottom of the stairwell 28 minutes before the meeting Roman had called for his captains at the casino's private room on the upper floor. The meeting that had been scheduled ostensibly to review the financial evidence Dom had been gathering, the meeting that Selena Voss intended to walk into and detonate everything. Amara stood at the bottom of those stairs and looked at her phone and thought about the man who had called her. She had a number, she had 30 seconds of voice and a set of facts that were too specific to have come from anywhere outside the situation. Whoever he was, he had access that was not peripheral. He had seen the 2022 transaction. He had known about Roman's conversation with his attorney. He had known about the recordings Selena was carrying. She called the number back. It rang 4 times. She was preparing to hang up when he answered. "I need a name," she said. No preamble. Yours a pause. "That's not something I'm prepared to give over the phone." "Then meet me. Right now." She checked the time 27 minutes before this becomes irreversible. Another pause. Longer. "The parking structure on the north side of the building," he said. "Level 2. You have 5 minutes." He hung up. She moved. The parking structure was cold and smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. The fluorescence on level 2 flickering in a way that suggested a maintenance request that had been ignored for months. Her footsteps were loud in it. She didn't try to make them quiet. He was standing between 2 parked cars near the far wall. Medium height, 50 or so, a face that had the well-worn quality of someone who had spent a lot of years making themselves easy to overlook. He was wearing a coat that was too light for the weather, and his hands were in its pockets. She stopped 6 feet from him. "Talk," she said. "My name is Victor Reyes," he said. "I've been an outside consultant to the organization that's been working against Roman Valenti for approximately 8 months. What I do for them is analyze financial structures, identify vulnerabilities." Amara looked at him. "You're working for his enemies." "I was," he said. "I'm telling you that in the past tense, because what I was shown when I came into this work and what I've actually found over 8 months are 2 different things." He shifted his weight. "I was told Blackstone Holdings was a predatory acquisition vehicle, that you were systematically positioning yourself to strip the Valenti family's legitimate assets, that Roman was a victim of a sophisticated financial play by his own wife. And I spent 8 months looking at every Blackstone transaction connected to Valenti properties," he said. "None of it tracks to predatory intent. All of it tracks to protection. The timing, the terms, the decisions about when to move and when to hold back, it's not how you build an attack. It's how you build a firewall." He looked at her directly. "Someone lied to the organization I work for. They were told a story about you that justified a significant operational investment in removing you from this situation. And the person who told them that story was Selena Voss." Amara heard this. She processed it. "She used them," she said. "She pointed them at me to clear the field, while feeding them Roman's operational intelligence." "Yes." Victor reached into his coat and produced a folded envelope. "I can't testify to any of this officially. I can't put my name in a room full of Valenti captains. But what I can give you is this." She took the envelope. "The original data transmission logs from Delta Veris," he said, "before the acquisition, pulled from a backup server that Selena's network didn't know existed because it predated her involvement with the company by 3 years. Those logs show the timestamp integrity of your original documentation." He nodded at the envelope. "Your records are clean, Mrs. Valenti. They were clean before she tried to dirty them, and this proves it. Amara looked at the envelope in her hands. Why, she said. Why are you doing this? Victor looked at the flickering fluorescent above them. Because the organization I work for is going to move on the Valenti structure in approximately 72 hours if tonight goes the way Selena intends, he said. And when they move, the collateral damage isn't going to be limited to Roman Valenti. There are 432 people employed in the legitimate Valenti businesses. They're going to lose their jobs. Their pensions are structured through the legitimate holding companies those go to. He looked back at her. I analyze financial structures. I'm very good at it. And I've spent 8 months watching someone use my work to build something that is going to hurt a lot of people who have nothing to do with any of this. Amara held the envelope. 17 minutes, she said. Go, he said. She went. She called Sandra from the elevator. I'm sending you a photograph of a document, she said the moment Sandra picked up. Delta Veris original transmission logs. Pre-acquisition backup. I need you to verify the source integrity in the next 10 minutes and call me back. Amara, 10 minutes for that kind of… Sandra. Her voice was flat. 10 minutes. She sent the photograph. She rode the elevator to the upper floor and stepped out into the carpeted corridor that led to the casino's private meeting room, and she walked toward it with the envelope in one hand and her phone in the other. And she was aware, in the specifically heightened way of someone whose body has decided that this is the moment, of everything: the pressure of the carpet under her feet, the low sound of ventilation, the distant noise of the casino floor 2 levels below, the way her own heartbeat had found a rhythm that was faster than normal, but steadier than she expected. The meeting room door was closed. There was a man outside it, one of Roman's. He looked at Amara with the specific expression of someone who had not been told what to do if she showed up. I need to go in, she said. Mr. Valenti asked that. I know what he asked. She looked at the man directly. Tell him Amara is outside and that what she has cannot wait for the end of this meeting. The man looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the door 6 inches and conveyed this information to someone inside in a low voice. There was a pause. Then the door opened. The room held 9 people. Roman at the head of the table. Dom to his right. 4 captains she recognized from years of family events. Their names were Marco, Pete, a man everyone called Sal, and a younger one named Greco who had moved up in the past 18 months. Gerald the attorney at the far end, papers in front of him, reading glasses pushed up on his head. A woman, Amara, didn't know who appeared to be Gerald's associate. And Selena. Selena was standing, not seated, in the position of someone who had been in the middle of presenting something when the door opened. She had a laptop open on the table and a portable projector throwing an image onto the white wall behind Roman's head. The image was a financial chart. Amara recognized the structure of it, a transaction map, shell companies connected by lines and arrows, and she recognized the specific transactions it was depicting because they were Blackstone transactions. Her transactions, rendered in the color-coded visual language of something that was meant to look suspicious. Selena looked at Amara the way a chess player looks at a piece that has moved unexpectedly onto a square it wasn't supposed to reach. Roman looked at Amara with an expression she couldn't entirely read: exhaustion, and something underneath it that might have been relief or might have been dread. I asked for he started. I know, Amara said. I need 3 minutes. This is not the time, Roman. Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It carried across the room with the specific quiet of someone who has decided they are done competing for space in conversations where they belong. 3 minutes. And then you can do whatever you've decided to do. The room was very still. Dom said nothing, but she saw his hand move slightly on the table, a small, almost imperceptible shift, like someone adjusting their position before something starts. Roman looked at her for a long moment. 3 minutes, he said. Selena's jaw tightened. Amara walked to the table. She placed the envelope on it. The image behind you, she said, addressing the room, is a transaction map of Blackstone Holdings acquisitions connected to Valenti properties. It's designed to suggest that those acquisitions were coordinated to establish financial leverage over this organization. She looked around the table. The timestamps on the documentation supporting that map were altered. The verification certificates attached to that documentation were issued by a company called Delta Veris, which was acquired 4 months ago by a parent entity whose beneficial ownership connects to 2 of the shell companies in Selena Voss's financial network. The room processed this. Selena said, "That's a remarkable accusation." Without the envelope, Amara said, contains the original Delta Veris transmission logs from a pre-acquisition backup server. Those logs show the verified timestamp integrity of Blackstone's original documentation before any of it was touched. She looked at Gerald. "Give it to someone who understands what they're looking at." Gerald reached for the envelope. Selena took 2 steps toward the table. "Whatever she's giving you was prepared by people she controls. You have no way of... The backup server predates your network's involvement with Delta Veris by 3 years," Amara said. She turned to look at Selena directly. For the first time directly in that room. "You didn't know it existed. That's why you didn't sanitize it." Selena held her gaze. The expression on her face was the expression of a person who is running rapid calculations and not arriving at a result they want. Not panic. Selena was too controlled for panic to show, but the thing underneath panic. The recognition that a contingency you did not plan for has arrived. "She's stalling," Selena said, addressing the captains. "She walked in here because she knew what I was presenting, and she needed to interrupt it. Look at what I've already shown you. Look at the pattern." "The pattern is yours," Dom said. Everyone looked at him. Dom's voice was even and unhurried, the voice of a man who speaks infrequently in rooms like this, because he has learned that frequency dilutes impact. "I spent the last day and a half going through 22 months of casino ledgers," he said. "Physical ledgers. I talked to Eddie Caruso." He paused. "Eddie flagged a variance 14 months ago. Someone told him it was being handled at a higher level and to stay quiet." He looked at Selena. "You told him that." Selena's expression did not change, but her breathing changed. Amara was close enough to see it, a single adjustment, a fraction of a second, quickly controlled. "I don't know what Eddie. I talked to him for 2 hours," Dom said. "He remembers exactly what you said to him. He remembers the date. He wrote it down. He let that land. He wrote it down because he's been carrying it for 14 months and he needed something to make it real so he could keep telling himself it happened the way it happened." Selena turned to Roman. "Roman," her voice shifted. The professional register dropped and something more personal came into it. Not desperate, exactly, but calibrated to sound intimate. "You know me. You know what I've built for this organization. You know what I risked coming in here and..." "Play the recordings," Amara said. The room went completely silent. Selena stopped. Roman looked at Amara. "She has recordings of private conversations." Amara said to Roman, "Between the two of you, she's been keeping them as insurance." She looked at Selena. "That's why you're here tonight, not just to present the documentation." The plan was to play the recordings if the documentation wasn't enough. To use Roman's own voice expressing doubt about me to finish what the paperwork started. Selena said nothing. "Play them," Amara said. "Play all of them." Amara Roman's voice had something raw in it now. "Play them," she said again. She did not look at Roman. She kept her eyes on Selena. "Because what's on those recordings is Roman saying he suspected me. And yes, that's going to be uncomfortable. But what else is on those recordings? The things you said to him about me, the framing you used, the specific language you used to take a man's existing doubt and turn it into a conclusion that's going to be visible too." She paused. "Play all of it. Let this room hear the whole thing." The silence stretched. Selena looked at Amara. Amara looked back. The two women held that look across the table for a moment that had the specific densities of something that has been building for a long time and has finally found its point of contact. Then Selena reached for her laptop. Roman said, "Selena, she wants them played," Selena said. Her voice had gone very flat. "Fine." The first recording lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. It was Roman's voice and Selena's voice, from what sounded like a private office somewhere, and the audio quality was slightly compressed, but clear enough for every word to land in the room exactly as intended. Roman was talking about Blackstone, about the 2022 transaction, about the way he had seen Amara's name and then chosen not to push it, not to confront her, because he had not been certain, and because his voice dropped here, became quieter, more uncomfortable because he hadn't been sure he wanted to know. Selena's voice on the recording was gentle, concerned. The voice of someone whose primary interest was in helping him understand something difficult. She said the things Amara had expected her to say. That secretiveness on that scale suggested intent. That a woman with access to that kind of capital and that kind of structure, who chose to keep it hidden from her husband, was not hiding it out of love. That the protection, if it was real, was the setup for something else. She said them in the careful, measured voice of someone who understood that the most effective manipulations don't feel like manipulations while they are happening. The room listened. Amara listened. She watched the captains' faces as they heard Roman's voice expressing doubt. She watched their reactions to Selina's guidance. She watched the specific moment it happened at the 3-minute mark, when the tone of the recording shifted and Selina moved from concerned colleague into something more deliberate. It was subtle, very subtle, but it was there. When the recording ended, the room was very quiet. Roman had not moved during the 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He sat at the head of the table with both hands flat in front of him and his eyes on the surface of the table, and Amara could see the particular quality of a man listening to himself be used in ways he had not understood were happening at the time. Greco, the youngest captain, said, "Play another one." Selina's hand hesitated over the laptop. "Play another one," Greco said again. His voice was 28 years old and trying to sound older, and in that moment it succeeded. Selina played another one. This one was longer, 12 minutes. It covered a conversation from approximately 4 months earlier, and as it played, the pattern became visible in a way that the first recording alone had not established. The way Selina returned to the same themes, the same framings, in different conversations, reinforcing them, letting Roman's own responses build the case she was constructing inside his head. It was methodical, patient. It had the architecture of something designed, rather than something that had simply happened between two people. At the 8-minute mark of the second recording, one of the older captains, Marco, who had been with the Valenti organization for over 2 decades and who was not known for emotional expression during meetings, pushed back from the table. Not dramatically. Just a small physical movement that said something without words. Dom sat very still, watching Selina. Gerald had opened the envelope while the recordings played. His associate was on her phone, running something. Gerald looked up at Roman when the second recording ended and gave a small nod that was clearly in reference to the transmission logs, to whatever his associate's verification had returned. Roman saw the nod. He looked at Gerald. "The backup logs are clean," Gerald said quietly. "The metadata is consistent with original filing dates. The Delta Veris certifications on Selina's documentation were issued after the acquisition." After. He said the last word separately, clearly. Selina closed her laptop. The sound of it closing was very loud in the room. "I want to show you something else," Amara said. She had her phone. She turned it to face the room to the photographs she had taken of Eddie Caruso's ledger pages, the penciled notations, the flagged variances. She walked the room through it. The timeline, the accounts, the shell companies, the consulting payments, the redirected casino revenue, the construction contract manipulation. She did not use complex language. She used simple language with specific numbers and specific dates, and she spoke slowly enough that every person in that room could follow each step. She had spent 4 months building this presentation, and she was giving it now without the airtight documentation she had planned to give it with, without the certified timestamps, without the forensics structure she had spent all that time constructing. She was giving it as herself, just herself, with phone photographs and transmission logs, and Eddie Caruso's handwritten notations, and 14 months of her own careful attention. It took 11 minutes. When she finished, the room was different from the room it had been when she walked in. Sal, who had said nothing throughout, looked at Selina and said, "Where did the casino money go?" It was the simplest possible question, and it carried the specific weight of a man who was not asking because he didn't already have a strong suspicion. He was asking because he wanted to hear what answer came back. Selina said, "I think this meeting has gone far enough off." "Where did the money go?" Sal said. Not a question this time. Roman finally looked up from the table. He looked at Selina with a face that Amara had not seen on him before, not anger, not the cold authority he deployed in professional situations, but something more fundamental than either of those things. The face of a man who has been sitting inside a version of events and is now watching that version dismantle itself piece by piece, and who is experiencing in real time the specific grief of understanding how thoroughly he has been handled. "Answer him," Roman said. Selina looked at Roman. The calculation in her face was visible now, in a way it hadn't been before, not because she had lost control of it, but because there was no longer enough strategic advantage in concealing it. The warmth, the concern, the intimacy of the woman who had sat to his left at dinner and accepted his trust and used it, all of that was not present in her face in that moment. What was present was something colder and more honest. "You can't prove the destination," she said. "We don't need to prove the destination to prove the theft," Gerald said from the far end of the table. Selina looked at him. "The pattern of extraction alone," Gerald began, "is circumstantial without destination proof," Selina said. Her voice had found a new register, clipped, precise, the professional version she had deployed when she first came into Roman's organization. Financial discrepancies happen. Variance in casino accounts can be attributed to Selina. Roman's voice, she stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. "The recordings," he said. "The ones you just played in this room." He stopped, started again. "You kept those for 2 years." She didn't answer. "You were recording me," he said. "Every conversation. For 2 years you were—" He stopped again. His hands moved slightly on the table. What was the plan? If tonight didn't work, if the documentation wasn't enough, if you needed something else, what was the plan? Selina's jaw moved. "That's not something I'm going to discuss in this room," she said. "The plan," Dom said from his position to Roman's right, his voice carrying the flat finality of someone who has spent 20 years learning exactly how much pressure a sentence needs, was to hand everything she had to the people she was feeding information to, including the recordings, so that when they moved against this organization, they'd have Roman's own voice on record, expressing doubt about his own family. He looked at Selina, which would have made it very difficult for anyone in this business to trust him afterward. Even if he survived everything else, the room absorbed this. Marco stood up from his chair. He did not do anything except stand, but the act of it changed the geometry of the room. Amara's phone buzzed. Sandra. She stepped back from the table and looked at the screen. Bank verification confirmed. 3 originating institutions. Wire transfer records pulled directly. All consistent with your documentation. Independent of Delta Veris entirely. Sending to Gerald now. Amara exhaled. It was a small sound. Nobody in the room heard it except possibly Dom, who was looking at her, and who gave a single brief nod that she returned. She stepped back to the table. Your attorney is receiving direct bank verification from 3 originating financial institutions, she said to Roman. Wire transfer records pulled directly from the source. No Delta Veris involvement. No third-party certification. The original transactions confirmed independently. She looked at the room. The Blackstone positions in Valenti properties were taken to protect them. Every dollar moved through a legitimate transaction with legitimate terms. The only financial predation that has occurred in this organization over the past 22 months has been conducted by the person standing in this room, who is not me. The room was so quiet that the ventilation was audible. Then Roman looked at Selina and said in a voice that was quiet and extremely tired, "Get her out." Marco moved. Selina took a step back from the table. Roman. Her voice had changed again. Not warm, not professional, but something rawer than either. "You know this isn't over. Whatever she's shown you tonight, whatever she's built when those people move, they're not moving," Amara said. Selina looked at her. "The organization you've been feeding information to made their operational assessment based on documentation showing Blackstone as a hostile actor," Amara said. "That documentation is now demonstrably fabricated. The financial intelligence you gave them is going to be worth considerably less to them once it becomes clear that the analyst who generated their threat assessment was working both sides." She paused. "Someone on your own team already figured that out. That's how I know what you were planning tonight." Something moved through Selina's face. It was the first time, the first moment in the entire course of that evening that something appeared in her expression that was not entirely calculated. "Victor," she said, barely above a whisper. Amara said nothing. Marco had reached Selina's side. He was not touching her. He didn't need to. Selina looked at Roman one final time. He did not look back at her. She picked up her laptop from the table. She held it against her chest, the way people hold things when everything else has been taken, and there is only the object in their hands that still belongs to them. Then she walked to the door, and Marco walked beside her, and the door closed behind them both. The room breathed. Roman sat at the head of the table for a long moment, not moving. His hands were flat on the table and his head was slightly bowed. And he looked, in that posture, like a man trying to locate something he has misplaced and is not certain he will find. The captains were looking at him. Gerald was receiving documents on his phone from Sandra. Dom was looking at Amara. Amara was looking at Roman. She was looking at the man she had loved for 6 years, the man who had suspected her for 3 of them, the man who had let that suspicion be weaponized against her, without ever coming to her with the simple question that might have changed everything. And she was feeling something that was not yet clear enough to name not anger, not grief, not the complicated relief of having survived the last several hours. Something that had all of those things in it, and something else besides. Roman raised his head. He looked at her across the table. Around them, the captains, the attorneys, the room it all existed, at some slight remove from the direct line of what was happening between them. 2 people across a table in a room that had just witnessed the destruction of a careful lie, looking at each other with the accumulated weight of 6 years and 3 years, years of suspicion, and 1 marriage and 1 filing and 1 evening that had stripped everything down to what was actually there. "You knew I suspected," he said. Not an accusation. A question that had given up the shape of a question. "I found out tonight," she said. His jaw worked. "If I had asked you," he said, 3 years ago, "if I had just—" "We're not going to know the answer to that," she said. "Not tonight." He nodded slowly. Gerald cleared his throat. Roman looked at him. "The bank confirmations are clean," Gerald said. "Completely clean. And the forensic accountant I've had on retainer for 6 years reviewed the preliminary transmission log documents in the last." He checked his phone 4 minutes. His words. "The alteration pattern on the Delta Vera certifications is consistent with post-acquisition metadata manipulation. He can produce a written analysis within 48 hours. Roman absorbed this. "The divorce papers," he said. He was looking at the table. "They're still." "On the dining room table where you left them," Amara said. "I didn't take them." He looked up at her. "I want it," he started. "Not now," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply final. "Not tonight." She picked up her phone from the table. She looked around the room, the captains, Gerald, Dom, the faces of the people who had watched her be handed divorce papers a week ago in a dining room 3 miles from here, who had been in rooms where Lucia had dismissed her, who had known her as Roman's wife for 6 years and had calibrated their regard for her against the Valenti family's regard, and found the number that seemed appropriate. She looked at all of them. "The forensic documentation will be in Gerald's hands within 48 hours, she said. "Everything. The Blackstone positions, the protection history, the casino account analysis, the shell company structures, the communications that can be attributed to the external network." She paused. "I'd suggest someone reach out to Eddie Caruso and make sure he and his daughter are somewhere safe for the next few days. He did the right thing, and he's going to need to know that meant something." Dom nodded. She walked to the door. She had her hand on it when Roman said her name. She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. She stood with her hand on the door and her back to the room. She took 1 breath that nobody could see because her back was to all of them. Then she turned. Roman was looking at her from across the room with an expression that she recognized from years ago, from before the marriage had accumulated its weight, before the suspicion and the silence and Selena and the dinner. An expression she had not seen on his face in a very long time. It was the expression of a man who understood, clearly and without remaining defense, that he had been wrong. "I'm sorry, he said. The room was very still. Amara looked at him for a long moment. She said, and she opened the door and walked through it. And behind her she heard the sound of the room beginning to exhale, the specific release of a space where something has just broken apart, and pieces have not yet settled into the shape of what comes next. And she kept walking down the carpeted corridor with her phone in her hand, and her heart hitting a rhythm that was still too fast, but beginning, slowly, to find its way back to something she recognized as her own. And at the end of the corridor, the elevator was waiting with its doors already open, as if it had been holding itself there for her. And she stepped in, and the doors closed, and for the 11 seconds of the ride down to the lobby, she allowed herself to stand in the enclosed metal box and feel the full weight of everything that had just happened, fear and the calculation, and the grief, and the specific loneliness of having been right about everything and having had to prove it in a room full of people who should have known it already. And then the doors opened and the lobby was in front of her. And she walked out into it and then through the front doors of the building into the night air, which was cold and smelled of the city and was completely indifferent to all of it. The way the city always was, the way it had been when she was a girl in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, and the way it would be long after every name in that room tonight had stopped mattering. She stood on the sidewalk. She took a breath. Her phone rang. It was Sandra. "Is it done?" Sandra said. Amara looked up at the building she had just walked out of, at the lit windows of the upper floor where the private meeting room was, at the city around it, enormous and still moving. "Almost," she said. "What's left?" She thought about the dining room table 3 miles away, the divorce papers still sitting on it, unsigned by either of them. She thought about the mansion, about Lucia, about 6 years of dinners, and small cruelties and swallowed words and the accumulated weight of being told, in 100 different ways, that she was not enough and did not belong. She thought about what it would mean to go back, what Roman's apology meant and what it didn't mean and what no apology could reach. She thought about Blackstone, about 432 people whose jobs existed inside legitimate businesses that she had been quietly holding together while nobody thanked her or even knew. "One more conversation," she said. "With Roman? With myself," she said. Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Take the time you need," she said. Amara stood on the sidewalk outside the casino in the cold night air of a city that had never once waited for her, and she held her phone against her side, and she looked up at the dark sky above the lit buildings, and she understood with the specific clarity that only arrives after everything has been survived, that the conversation she needed to have with herself was the one she had been avoiding since the beginning. Not about Roman, not about Selena, not about the empire she had saved, or the marriage that was lying in pieces, or the family that had never wanted her, about what she wanted now. What the woman who had built Blackstone from a second-hand laptop in a 2-bedroom apartment, carefully and been careful for too long, who had protected a man who was watching her with one eye, and trusting her with neither, who had survived tonight and the night before it and 6 years of nights before, that what that woman wanted to do with the rest of her life now, that the things she had been holding together had finally been set down. The wind moved through the street. Somewhere behind her, on the upper floor of the building, a room full of men was beginning to understand the shape of what had just happened, and Amara Whitfield stood outside all of it, for the first time in 6 years entirely outside all of it, and let the question sit in her chest without rushing to answer it, because some questions are too important to answer before you are ready, and she had learned, at considerable cost, that being ready was not the same as being afraid to wait. She was not afraid anymore. She started walking. She walked for 40 minutes, not toward anything specific, just through the city, the way she used to walk when she was younger, and the apartment felt too small, and the problems felt too large. And the only thing that helped was the specific act of moving through space, letting the streets absorb some of the pressure that had nowhere else to go. Chicago in late October at 11 at night was cold and honest. It didn't perform anything for you. The wind off the lake came in without apology, and the streets were lit in that particular orange that made everything look slightly like a memory. And Amara walked through all of it with her coat open, because she hadn't stopped to button it and didn't feel like stopping now. She thought about her mother, Diane Whitfield, who had worked cafeteria shifts with swollen ankles and laughed loud enough to shake walls, was 73 years old now and lived in an apartment in the same neighborhood she had always lived in, a better apartment than the one Amara had grown up in, because Amara had been sending money home for years in amounts that Diane always protested and always accepted. They spoke every Sunday. Diane did not know the details of Blackstone. She knew her daughter ran a company and that it was successful. She asked about Roman sometimes, in the careful way of a mother who has opinions she has decided are not hers to deliver uninvited. Amara had not told her about the dinner, about the divorce papers, about any of it. She would need to tell her now. She stopped at a corner. She recognized 3 blocks from the apartment she had lived in during her last years at the advisory firm, before Blackstone had grown large enough to require her to move somewhere with room for an office. The building was still there. Different name on the directory now. Same narrow windows on the fourth floor where she used to sit with the second-hand laptop and the spreadsheets and the particular stubbornness of a person who has decided that the way things are is not the way they have to be. She stood at that corner for a moment. Then she turned around and walked back toward where she had parked. She had one more thing to do tonight. The mansion was quiet when she returned. The staff had gone to their quarters. The lights in the main hallway were on their overnight setting, dim and directional. The dining room, when she passed its open doorway, was dark. The table cleared by someone who had come in after the dinner without being asked, because that was what the staff did in this house. They maintained order around whatever was happening between the people inside it, and they did it invisibly, the way all essential work tends to be done. The divorce papers were still on the table. She could see them from the hallway faintly in the light spilling in from behind her. A pale folder on dark wood. She did not go in. She went upstairs. Lucia's rooms were at the end of the east wing, a suite she had occupied for decades and had furnished and refurnished according to her own precise requirements until it looked exactly the way she wanted it to look, which was like a place that answered to nobody. Amara had been in those rooms exactly twice, in 6 years once, for a family gathering that had overflowed from the main floor, and once when Lucia had been briefly ill and Roman had asked Amara to check on her. She knocked on the sitting room door. A long pause. Then Lucia's voice, awake and unsurprised, in the way of someone who does not sleep deeply and had been expecting, perhaps, that this night would not end before something else happened. "Come in." Lucia was in the chair by the window. She was in a dressing gown, dark silk, and her white hair was down in a way Amara had never seen it before, loose around her shoulders, making her look older and somehow more real than she ever did in the armored presentation of her daytime self. She had a glass of water on the table beside her. She was not reading. She had just been sitting. She looked at Amara when she came in. She looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Amara stood inside the doorway. She did not sit. She had not been offered a seat, and she was not going to take one. "It's over," Amara said. "Selena is gone. The financial evidence is in Gerald's hands. The documentation holds." Lucia's expression did not change significantly. She absorbed this, the way she absorbed most things without visible effort, as if she had already considered this outcome among others, and had arrived here prepared. "Roman," she said. "Is fine," Amara said. "The organization is intact. The outside threat has been neutralized." She paused. "Your family will need time to work through what happened internally, but the structure holds." Lucia was quiet. "You saved it," she said. "I protected what I could protect," Amara said. "That's different." Lucia looked at her hands in her lap. "I owe you," she began. "No," Amara said. Lucia stopped. "I'm not here for that," Amara said. "I'm not here for an apology or a recalculation of what I was worth. I'm past that." She kept her voice even. Not hard, she was too tired for hardness. And something about the sight of Lucia, with her hair down in a dark room, had taken the edge off the anger that might otherwise have been there. "I'm here because I'm going to sign the divorce papers tomorrow, and I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Not through Roman, not through Gerald." Lucia looked up. "It's the right decision," Amara said. "Not because the marriage was nothing. It was something. For a long time it was something real." She stopped. She looked at the window beside Lucia, at the dark courtyard below, with the fountain and the wet stone. "But real isn't the same as sustainable. And I've spent 6 years sustaining something that was slowly taking pieces of me I'm not going to get back by staying." The room was very quiet. "I know you thought I wasn't right for him," Amara said. "I know you thought what I came from was the problem. That the right woman would have been someone with the right name and the right connections and the right understanding of what this family required." She paused. "I want you to know that I understand why you thought that. I don't agree with it, but I understand it." Lucia's jaw moved slightly. "What I am asking from you," Amara said, "is nothing. I don't want your blessing or your regret or your explanation. I'm asking for the acknowledgement that you understand what I'm telling you. That I'm leaving this marriage on my own terms. That I am not being pushed out. That the door I walk through tomorrow, I walk through because I chose it." Lucia looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, something that Amara had not expected. "My husband used to say that the people who keep things running are never the ones who get credit for it," she said. He said it was a structural feature of how power works, that the visible person absorbs the recognition and the invisible person absorbs the work. She stopped. I watched you for 6 years. I watched you sit at that table and take everything that table required of you. I told myself it was evidence of weakness. She looked at her hands again. I was wrong about that. Amara absorbed this. That's not an apology, Lucia said. I don't know how to make one that would mean anything at this point. I'm aware of that, I know, Amara said. But it's true, Lucia said. I know that too, Amara said. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then she said, "Good night, Mrs. Valenti." She turned and walked back down the east wing corridor, and the sound of the sitting room door, clicking shut behind her, was very small in the large quiet of the house. She signed the papers the following morning. Not immediately, she woke at 6, made coffee, sat with it at the small writing desk in her sitting room for nearly an hour, without the laptop open, without her phone, without any of the equipment of the work she had been doing. Just sat with the coffee and the morning light coming through the window and the specific exhaustion of a body that has run very hard and is now being asked to stop. At 7:15, Roman knocked. She said, "Come in." He looked like she felt, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix because it isn't sleep that caused it. He was dressed, which told her he had been up for a while, and he had his own coffee, which he held with both hands the way people do when they need something to do with their hands. He stood inside the doorway. He did not come farther in. "I called Victor Reyes this morning," he said. She looked at him. "He told me everything," Roman said. The organization, what they were planning, how Selena positioned herself with them. He paused. "He's going to cooperate with the financial investigation. All of it." She nodded. "The captains want to formally acknowledge what you did," he said. "Dom asked me to tell you. He said his words that they owe you a debt that isn't financial." He stopped. He said it better than I'm saying it. "Dom usually does," she said. A brief, exhausted flicker of something crossed Roman's face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. He looked down at the coffee in his hands. "I'm not going to try to change what you've decided," he said. I want to tell you that if you give me time, that if I had another chance." He stopped himself. "But I know what that is. That's me asking for something, because I understand its value now that I've lost it. And you told me once, a long time ago, that you didn't want to be someone's lesson." She had said that. She had forgotten she'd said it. Early in their relationship, in a conversation about something entirely else, a generalization that she hadn't known he had kept. She felt something move through her chest. A kind of ache that was not about regret, exactly, but was in the neighborhood of it. "I'll have my attorney contact Gerald today," she said. "I'll sign my side this morning." He nodded. He stayed in the doorway a moment longer. "What you built," he said. "Blackstone. What you built from nothing, and then used to hold mine together for years." He stopped. "I don't have language for that. I've been trying to find some since that dining room, and I don't have it." "You don't need to," she said. "I want to." "Roman." She looked at him directly. "Some things don't get wrapped up. That's not failure. That's just how they are." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once. The slow nod of a man accepting something he cannot change and has decided to stop fighting. He said her name, just her name. The way he had said it years ago, when it still meant exactly itself, and nothing complicated had grown up around it. "Take care of yourself," she said. He left. She sat with the cooling coffee for a few more minutes. Then she picked up her pen and signed the divorce papers with her full name, Amara Whitfield, not Amara Valenti, which she had sometimes used, and sometimes not over 6 years, without resolving, which she preferred, and placed them in an envelope for her attorney to collect. She did not feel the things she had expected to feel. She felt tired. She felt clear. She felt the specific quality of someone who has put down a weight they carried for so long that the absence of it requires adjustment, not relief. Exactly, but the beginning of it. She started packing that afternoon. She did not take much. The things that were hers were mostly not physical things. The clothes, some books, a few items that had come with her from before her mother's photograph, a small wooden figure she had bought at a street market 20 years ago, a notebook she had carried since the year Blackstone turned its first real profit, filled with calculations and marginal notes in her own handwriting, the physical record of something built from nothing. She left behind the jewelry Roman had given her. Not as a statement, she didn't need it to be a statement. She left it because it belonged to a version of her life that was closing, and the jewelry was part of the set of that version, and it would have felt strange to carry it out the door. She was finished by evening. Dom carried her bags to the car. He didn't say much. Dom rarely said much. But at the door, he put out his hand, and she shook it, and he held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. And that was the whole of what needed to be said between them, and both of them understood it. She drove away from the mansion without looking back at it. She noticed that she did not look back, and she thought about it for a few minutes as she drove, trying to determine if it was strength or avoidance. And then she decided it was probably neither, that it was simply the natural behavior of someone who already knows what is behind them and is more interested in what's ahead. The settlement took 4 weeks. It was clean because Amara made it clean. She took nothing from the Valenti marriage itself, no community property claim against Roman's business holdings, no alimony, no portion of the legitimate business structures. The things that were legally hers through the marriages, she declined. Her attorney argued with her about this for 2 days. Sandra argued with her about it for 3. She had not changed her mind. What she kept was everything Blackstone had acquired through legitimate financial transactions, the debt positions, the property interests, the business stakes. These were not Valenti property. They had never been Valenti property. They had been purchased with her money, managed by her company, and documented under her name. She kept those. And with those holdings, over the following months, she did something that none of the Valenti attorneys had anticipated, and that Gerald, when he heard about it, apparently sat in silence for nearly a minute before responding. She restructured. The legitimate Valenti businesses, the construction companies, the commercial real estate, the restaurants, she reorganized through Blackstone into structures that separated them formally and legally from the criminal operations that had been entangled with them for decades. She did this not as an act of charity toward Roman, though it benefited him. She did it because 432 people worked in those legitimate businesses and had nothing to do with anything that had happened in that casino meeting room, and their jobs and their pensions and their health benefits were real and mattered. Roman signed off on the restructuring. He did not have to. He chose to. His attorney told him it was the most favorable outcome available to the legitimate side of the operation. Roman said he knew that. He signed anyway. The criminal operations were another matter. The exposure that the investigation into Selena's activities generated created its own legal consequences for the organization, and Roman navigated those consequences over the following year with the diminished capacity of a man who has lost the 2 people, his most trusted advisor and his wife, whose combined competence had been, holding things together without his full awareness. He navigated them adequately, not perfectly, but adequately, which was the honest word for it. He did not rebuild what had existed before. Something smaller and more sustainable took its place. Whether he had chosen that, or had it chosen for him, was a question that probably had an answer somewhere in the middle. Selena Foss was formally charged on 17 counts spanning financial fraud, corporate espionage, and violations of several statutes related to unauthorized disclosure of confidential business information. The case took 18 months to reach trial. She was convicted on 12 of the 17 counts. Her attorneys argued for sentencing considerations based on cooperation. She had provided information about the external organization that had targeted the Valenti structure, and that cooperation had demonstrable value to the investigators involved. The judge gave her 8 years. Victor Reyes received a cooperation agreement and a reduced civil liability arrangement that allowed him to continue working, under monitoring, in financial analysis. He sent Amara a brief letter 6 months after the trial ended. It said, "I found the work you built more impressive the longer I studied it. I hope you know that." She read it twice and put it in the notebook with calculation blocks from Blackstone's first profitable year. Lucia Valenti died 14 months after the divorce was finalized. It was cardiac, fast, the doctors said. She had not been in significant distress. She had been in her rooms at the mansion, which Amara supposed was probably how Lucia would have chosen it if she had been given the choice. Roman called Amara to tell her. She answered on the 3rd ring. She was in her office, a real office now, in a building downtown that Blackstone had purchased 3 years earlier, with her name on the door in letters that were not large and were not small. Roman's voice on the phone was the voice of a man who had been sitting alone with a significant thing for some hours before he could make himself call. She let him talk. He said the practical things, first the arrangements, the timing. And then there was a pause and he said, "She asked about you. A few weeks ago." Amara was quiet. She asked if you seemed okay," he said. "I said I thought so. I said from what I'd heard, through Gerald, and the restructuring process, you seemed like yourself." He stopped. She said good, that was all. She said good and moved on. Amara looked at the window of her office. At the Chicago skyline, gray and familiar and enormous. "I'll send flowers," she said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't," she said. "I want to." She went to the memorial. She sat in the back. She wore black. She did not speak to Roman. At length they exchanged a few words at the reception, standing in the same large room where 6 years of dinners had happened, and the room looked different with different people in it and different food on the table, and none of the particular architecture of a Valenta family gathering, arranged around Lucia at its center. It looked like a room. She said hello to Dom, who looked older and said she looked well, which she thought was probably true. She said hello to Marco and to Sal and to Greco, who had gotten married in the past year to a woman he appeared genuinely pleased about, if the way he kept looking across the room at her was any indication. She did not stay long. As she was leaving, she passed through the front hall, the same front hall where Lucius had stood, a year and some months ago, with her hand extended toward the door, and her perfectly arranged face, and her voice saying the words that had seemed, in that moment, like an ending. She paused in the front hall. She looked at the space. The fountain in the courtyard outside, visible through the tall windows, was running. Somebody had turned it on. The water caught the pale afternoon light. She thought about what Lucia had said in the sitting room that last night, about the invisible work, about the people who never get credit for keeping things running. She thought about it without bitterness, which surprised her slightly. The bitterness had been there for a while, and she had expected it to outlast more things than it had. It had not outlasted this. She put on her coat. She walked out. The Whitfield Center opened on a Tuesday in April, 17 months after the divorce was finalized. The mansion had required significant renovation, not structural. The building was sound, but the interior required transformation from a private home organized around the requirements of one powerful family into a space organized around the requirements of whoever needed it. More rooms, better bathrooms, a commercial kitchen that could produce real meals in real volume, a suite of offices for the employment specialists and financial counselors who were on staff 3 days a week. Amara had managed the renovation through a project coordinator named Patricia, a former nonprofit administrator who had been doing this work for 15 years and who operated with an organized ferocity that Amara found extremely restoring after months of working inside the particular kind of chaos that legal and financial crises generate. The center focused on transitional housing families in the gap between emergency shelter and stable housing, who needed somewhere to be while they assembled the pieces of something more permanent. It also ran a job training program and a financial literacy workshop, the latter having been built partly from curriculum Amara developed herself because she understood financial literacy as something that was taught to the people who were born near money and withheld from the people who weren't. And she found the injustice of this specific and addressable. The opening was not a large event. She had not wanted it to be large, not for reasons of modesty, but because large events at the opening of something like this tended to become about the people who funded them rather than the people they were built for, and that was not what she was interested in. 32 people attended, staff, a few partner organizations, representatives from the city's housing assistance programs, and the first 12 families who would be moving into the center over the following week. She spoke for 7 minutes. She thanked the staff. She explained the practical mechanics, how to access services, what the process looked like, what the center could offer, and what it couldn't. She did not speak about herself or why she had built this, or what it had cost her to arrive at this particular Tuesday in April. Afterward, while Patricia was showing a group of families through the upper floors, Amara stood in the front hall. It was the same front hall. Same floors, different rugs. Same windows, different light. The fountain in the courtyard was running. She had kept it running, a decision she made without fully examining it and had not regretted. A woman named Rosa was standing near the front door with her 7-year-old daughter Lily, who was holding a stuffed bear and looking at the high ceilings with the specific expression of a child encountering a space that is much larger than anything they have been inside before. Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama," she said, "are we actually allowed to stay here?" Rosa looked like she was trying to hold several things together at once, which was the expression of someone for whom stability had been intermittent and who did not yet trust good news to stay good. Amara crossed the hall. She knelt down. She was wearing a good coat and good shoes, and she knelt on the floor of the front hall and looked at Lily directly, this 7-year-old with the stuffed bear, and she said, "Nobody who walks through these doors is going to have to prove they belong here. That's the only rule about it." Lily considered this seriously, the way children consider things that are being told to them by an adult who is making eye contact and means it. "Even me," she said. "Especially you," Amara said. Lily looked at the stuffed bear. She looked back at Amara. Then she held out the bear. It was an offering, the specific offering of a small child who has something they love and wants to share it as a gesture of trust, which is one of the most generous gestures a person can make, regardless of their age. Amara took the bear gently. She looked at it. She handed it back. "He should stay with you," she said. "He belongs here too." Lily hugged the bear. Rosa said quietly, "Thank you." Amara stood. She looked at the hall around her, the space where she had been told to leave, where a woman in black silk had pointed toward the door with the certainty of someone who had never once questioned her own authority to make that gesture. She looked at the staircase, the windows, the courtyard fountain through the glass. She thought about the word belong, about how much energy she had spent over 6 trying to earn it from people who had decided before she arrived that it was not available to her, about how the word itself was not the problem. Belonging was real. It was a real human need. She had felt it, and she knew what it felt like when it was genuine, but about how it had been wielded in that house as an instrument, a way of keeping a specific category of person in a specific category of feeling, and about how the most complete response to that was not to reject the concept of belonging, but to rebuild what generated it, to make the instrument into something else. She walked to the office Patricia had set up for her near the back of the ground floor, a modest room, smaller than the sitting room upstairs had been, with a desk she had chosen herself and a window that looked out on the side garden that a local nursery had agreed to maintain as a volunteer project. She sat down. She opened her laptop. Blackstone had 2 new acquisition targets under review, and a pending partnership with a community development financial institution that would allow it to extend its work into housing finance in neighborhoods that traditional lenders persistently underserved. Sandra was managing the legal structure on both. There were 47 emails waiting. She closed the laptop. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the small office, with the window and the garden. She thought about Roman. Not with the complicated weight she had carried for so long, but in the simple way. You think about someone who is real in your life and is no longer in it with the clear-eyed acknowledgement that it had mattered, that it was over, that both of those things were true at the same time. She had loved him. She did not regret having loved him. She did not wish the 6 years away. They had cost her things she could measure and things she couldn't, and they had also taught her things about herself that she could not have learned differently about the specific form her own fear took, about what she was capable of enduring and what she would not endure again, about the difference between patience and complicity and how easy it was to mistake one for the other when you wanted badly to believe they were the same thing. She picked up the notebook from the corner of the desk, the one she had brought from the mansion, filled with calculations and marginal notes from Blackstone's early years. She opened it to a blank page near the back. She wrote a number. The number was 432. She looked at it for a moment. Then she added to it the 12 families moving into the center this week, times an average household size, a rough estimate, then the projected capacity over the first year of operation. She kept adding. The number grew. She was not a woman who expressed things through large statements or dramatic gestures. What she felt. She had always felt most clearly through numbers, through the specific language of what things cost and what they were worth, and what could be done with a given set of resources if you were precise and patient and willing to work in the spaces that other people had decided weren't worth their attention. She looked at the number she had written. It was significantly larger than where she had started. She wrote the date next to it, April, the year that she was not going to think of as the year after, but simply as the year it was, the current year, the one she was living in, which was hers, in a way that the previous 6 had not entirely been. She closed the notebook. She opened her laptop. She replied to the first email and then the second, and then she got up and went back out into the hall because Patricia had a question about the intake process for next week's families. And there was actual work to do, real and specific and present tense, the kind of work that connects you to the ground when everything else has been altitude and turbulence for a long time. She answered Patricia's question. She walked through the common room, where 3 of the children who had arrived that morning were sitting on the floor with a staff member who had produced a box of art supplies from somewhere and was organizing them with the kind of cheerful authority that suggests genuine vocation. She walked through the kitchen, where dinner was already being prepared for the first time in this space as a space meant for more than one family. She went back through the front hall. The fountain was still running in the courtyard. The afternoon light had shifted while she was inside, and was coming through the tall windows at a lower angle now, catching the water differently, the way light on water is never exactly the same twice. She stood there for a moment, not thinking about Roman, not thinking about Lucia, or Selena, or the casino meeting room, or the dining room, or the black folder, or any of the architecture of the previous years. Just standing in the hall of a building that used to mean one thing and now meant something else, in the specific way that places change when the people who give them meaning change. She had been ordered out of this house. She was standing in it now, not as anyone's wife, not as anyone's opponent, not as the hidden billionaire, or the wronged woman, or the silent keeper of anyone else's empire, just as herself, as the woman she had been before any of this, and through all of it, and on the other side of it, the woman from the 2-bedroom apartment, the woman with the second-hand laptop, the woman who had built something from nothing and used it to save people, who never knew they were being saved, and who had finally, at considerable cost, and after considerable time, stopped making herself invisible as a way of making herself safe. She was visible now, not because anyone had given her permission, because she had walked back through the door on her own terms and stood in the room and taken up the space that had always been hers to take up, and no one was going to tell her otherwise, and she did not need them to. Outside, through the tall windows, the fountain ran. The afternoon light moved. Somewhere in the upper floors, a child's voice, Lily, probably, or one of the other children who had arrived that morning, rang out with the specific, undifferentiated joy of a child discovering that a large space has an echo, calling her own name into it, and hearing it come back. Amara smiled. It was a small smile, private, the kind that doesn't require an audience. She put her hands in the pockets of her coat and stood in the front hall of the house, where she had once been told she didn't belong, and she let the sound of that child's voice echo through the space, and it was the best thing she had heard in a very long time.